light to dark. And some of your light lines are going to be just to give you what is basically a foundation. So I'm going to start with my, in this case, so you can see my lines a little clear. I'm going to work with a little bit of darker pencils. Always a sharp pencil, best tool. I like to emphasize your grip. The way you hold your pencil, if you're holding it like this, it means you're ready to write. The way you want to hold your pencil for drawing, place your finger, index finger, thumb, and then you can hold it with your index middle finger and just press lightly with your thumb. This is your overhand grip. And what it does is it immediately gives you a full range of motion. Now that full range of motion, it also gives you a lightness. So I could go ultra light from side to side of the paper. Now you may feel like you lose a little bit of control, but that control is what I want you to work out. What we talk, well, how we refer to it, that detail we look for, that I prefer you look for looseness of line. So no matter how hard you feel, it feels, or how awkward it feels, you need to position yourself. Sometimes maybe standing, if you're working at a table. So standing, so your posture allows you to bring the tip of the pencil down and be able to do a full range of motion. But definitely using this grip is the key to maximizing what you're going to gain from these lessons. Here's number one. I'm going to go as a warm-up exercise right to the top of my paper, and I'm looking at the image that you see on screen, and I'm going to draw a line, just a horizontal line here at the top, and I'm going to bring a vertical line really light. So notice how easily I could just bring it straight down, and I'm going to measure down here at the bottom a similar horizontal line. Now, the next step would be, and this is a way of kind of fragmenting, structuring, building up your drawing. You don't have to draw these lines every single time, but the fact that you would visualize them would be really helpful. Now, how do I find the middle? Guess what? I can eyeball it. Is that the middle? Actually, I could tell that this, and we would generally use something to measure that, our finger like this. I would use my pencil, meaning I put the tip of the pencil at the top and then mark it with my index finger here. See where the line lines up with it? And then without moving my finger, bring that down to see if it matches. And notice how it's just a little bit off. It's a little bit longer here, which means I just got to move it down half the distance. And right there, I can almost guarantee that that is right in the middle. Now, there are other tools. For example, this one, which is a proportional divider. Or you could use your regular average this is a compass here, actually. So measuring with, this is what is this, a 5th grade tool, that it comes so handy, where I could just line it up, check it. Notice that it's exactly in the middle. Now, does it have to be that exact? It depends on your style of drawing. With this proportional divider, it does basically the same thing. I can line up my points here. And if you're going to be doing figure drawing or portrait drawing, this tool is a must, especially if you're working in different proportions. So I have my top, my bottom, and I found my middle. So I got a sense of the structure. Now the key is, when I look at the drawing, I'm looking at my figure. I have a sense that, okay, the head goes somewhere over here. There's going to be a shoulder in the back. But the key is going to be what lines up here, which, as you can see, it's the hip and the side of the hip, right at the top of the leg. It's not at the thigh, or it's not the belly button. Belly button would line up somewhere over here. At least it's one way to begin to see proportion. It's one way to begin to see proportions where you're going to take that out of the equation. So the first method that I want you to try today is going to be straight line shaping. So these are straight line studies. And we're just going to basically copy this one. How do we do this? According to this, imagine this as your meridian here. So this is your guiding line. If I were to just line it up, the one thing I need to find is the angle of this line here. So I could do that by checking it with my model. In this case, I would line it up right over your computer, and you would see how, in my case, I'm going to show you what I'm using. I'm using my iPad here. So how would I go about this? I could line up my pencil right over it and then bring it straight across and check it. Just like that. And every angle that I see on my reference, so if you're working from a photo or from life, you would actually hold your pencil, close one eye, look at the angle, and then bring it right over, and then just copy it. So you're looking at two major factors here. You're looking at angle, you're looking at position, don't forget about your grip. You're looking at the angle, you're looking at the position of this line, how it lines up to the middle, to the top, and the length. Let's go ahead and look at the next one. And we could do this one a little bit looser. So now, the next thing would be, how dark do I have to make these lines? Is this my final drawing? No, this is a method of just looking at the whole through straight lines. Now it gets a little more complicated here because how do I line up? These don't touch. So I begin to look at lines. Is this a vertical line? No. Vertical would be here. So it's looking at, if I were looking at a clock, is it 6 o'clock? No. Is it more towards 7 o'clock? Yes, but it's not exactly 7 o'clock. That's one way to see these lines. So if I could look at this one, it's not 3 o'clock, it's more like 4 or 3:30. And just begin to line up, going across my median, seeing how these relate to each other. As I continue, only using the angle, and sometimes you can actually begin to see triangles. If you were to continue the line, I see that they would intersect. That gives me a clue. And it brings me right over this area. How far out? Meaning this line that I'm drawing here, how far out? Does it line up straight up with this one? Or is it outside of it? Or is it inside of it? There we go. Now we get to the part where maybe I went a little too long with one of these lines. You just bring your eraser. Sometimes erase the whole thing if you need to. Reassess. Maybe add more angle. Compare, bringing over. How this and this line almost look parallel. And instead of thinking of a figure, we begin to think of the smaller parts. And instead of thinking of smaller parts and the complexity of them, we just want to pretty much get a general sense. So here, finally, we come to the middle. And notice how this line that aims right at it, as long as I capture that angle, begins to give me a general structure. Maybe this one was a little too long. So my posture, reevaluate. So I do not add any curves at all. This is your goal right now. Trying to get as close as possible to the angle, the length of the line, the position of the line. And then here, we basically bring that down. We have a little bit of Which way should I go, here or here? Well, since I'm here, I will work this area out. And the way I would do that is first find the angle, find that triangle, and the second angle, and how it meets that center line. From here, I see that there's somewhat of a parallel and very important angle here. Now, how far do I bring this line? I use measurements. So how far does this line go? Does it line up with the edge of these two, or does it go past? And it goes just a little bit past. So it goes right to about here. So this is one method where if you learn how to manage, how to find angles, the proper angles of the body, of the figure, you can then take this to the next step. And what would the next step be? Well, now that I have these lines, I could begin to shorten them, add smaller curves, I'm sorry. And independent or smaller features. But actually, I would want you to stop there because this is going to be very key. How you devise, how you come through this most elemental stage of your figure drawing is going to be crucial. And we're going to do this a couple of times. So this was just the intro, call it a warm-up, but I hope you save it because I would like to see it at the end. This would be the first one you're going to show me. And so we move to the next image. So for our next image, we have this figure here. So once again, we're going to focus on straight lines. And this one, whew, becomes a little trickier now. How am I going to, I have this line, because it's holding the stick there, but how do I find that line right through the middle of the body? Do I need to find the middle? Can I actually just start going and building those edge lines that would feel more natural? I would highly recommend using the method where I'm looking at the top. Now, notice that I'm leaving a little bit of room. I'm not going this close to the edge of the paper. I'm going a little bit lower because if this is the top of my head, then I have enough room for the hand that will go somewhere up here. But if this is my top, and it almost lines up down here with the feet, and I have that middle line, and it's always best if you have a reference to actually do this to your reference. So when you transcribe it, when you bring it over, you actually know, you can see where the lines will land. Using your pencil or a way of measuring on the screen, if you can, or with a reference, you would find that middle point. Now, I'm going to use this and I'll show you where I would point. I would actually go from knowledge right to the same spot, which is the middle of the hip, and bring that over. I see that maybe it's just a little bit off. It's a little bit lower here. So I'm going to go to the center, right to the knot. And that's a little too much. So maybe a little bit higher. And there it is. So my middle point, and as of right now, it really doesn't matter. It would be to visualize. I would eyeball it right about here first. That's my first measurement. Using only my pencil, I would bring this measurement here. Show you a little bit easier right here. Bring it down. And if it doesn't match, I'm looking at halfway between here and here. So make sure you erase that first one so you don't confuse yourself. Check that again. And there it is. So you notice that my measurement from the finger to the tip, this line will line up right at the top. There we have it. And this line, my middle line, I know exactly where it lines up. So I'm going to show you very quickly where it did. The measurement halfway from this toe, or the bottom of the foot here, it lined up right to the middle of this cloth, right in this area here. I was measuring up to the knot, which would be the groin here, or even sometimes the belly button. But notice here, we have a younger, especially from an adult to an infant, there's a little bit of variation in the proportions. So it goes right here to this middle area. And if I place that there again, there it goes, right to the top of the head. So it's somewhere right in here. This is your middle. And that obviously would line up with just above the wrist. And just on the other side, right at the top of the thigh. So that's what you need to figure out in order to begin finding those angles. So once you have sort of a guide here, what would be the first major angle? You always want to start somewhere at that. I myself usually start at the top, at the head. Top of the head, finding that angle. Now with size, here is going to be your first test. How do I see smaller lines? And they're almost, if you look closely at this image, and I'm going to zoom it in, notice right here, here's the face. Notice that there's only two lines coming in the front, 1, 2, and then the third one is the chin. So if you break them down, the idea here today is not to try to describe this figure, this drawing, there we go, with only straight lines. And those straight lines, as close as you can with the angle, at first attempt, you should keep them light. There may be a little bit of angle at the top of the head here. It actually, instead of being horizontal, it comes down a little. Now, make sure your lines begin to get loose. Yes, you do see some curves, but you do not want to fall to the trap of following the curve. Right now, you want to simplify what you're seeing into simple, sometimes avoiding the too many short straight lines, but longer versions. And yes, you do see alteration, but the first ones, your goal should be to make them as long and as straight as possible without going all the way to stick figure. The inside and then the outside. The inside and the outside of each of the parts. So you could almost come to the point where you could count how many lines. I could say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11 lines so far. But if we get caught up in beginning to round them, well, you're adding way too many. So here, for the torso, I know it goes up, and I know it has some curve, but you want to simplify it. And one way to simplify that is to squint at it. Squint at the image. Try to simplify it even further. That's one way. And why you would do that, it allows the flow of information to be just a little bit less, blurring out the information. checking angle. And remember, right now you're just playing with angles. Finding where that angle breaks into another major angle and avoiding curves. So here, there's a really crucial line for me, how the width, and I'm looking at relationships here. So remember that parallel line we saw, how it repeats almost, giving us that volume? I see it here. Now the middle, this would be a little bit higher. Small line, finding this place. It's going to line up right here. And it would go just past a little bit. Where the goal is to define, in the absolute simplest terms, the basic structure. Think of it as a block of marble. And we're from here, we could literally carve it out, knowing we have the proportions, knowing we also have the general angles, with the tiny, tiny little changes that at any moment I see anything off that I would see as off in the structure, I could easily come back to lift this just a little bit here. Making this a little bit shorter. There we go. And if you need to, we would bring about even the angle of this, the verticality of it, walking stick or the pole. And now I could actually begin to see, yep, there may be something that I need to reassess right here with some of the smaller curves. And that could be easier once you begin to see it this way. Now notice that you have the whole tilt, you have the general proportions, and as we begin to develop this figure, any step we go from here, we're going to be adding complexity. So what you want to think, the way you want to think about this is simplest, easiest, and also biggest. And as we become smaller and more complex, you're multiplying the chances of error. So you want to make sure you have this as close as possible in terms of how close to seeing simplicity. And you could measure, okay, we have the shoulder here, and how this one is supposed to be higher, how it lines up with the opposite side. And now I'll begin to break these lines into smaller, not curves. And here's where I would maybe switch to the darker pencil if needed. So I'm going from a 4B to a 6B. And that is actually way too dark. I wouldn't do this as my second step. But it's so you could see the lines on camera. Otherwise, it would be too light. But at this stage, you're drawing, if you were doing a figure drawing, your lines would look so light, you could literally scribble over them, and then those underneath would disappear. The lighter lines would disappear. So what do I begin to see here? I begin to see rotation, trying to avoid the curves. What I want to do is maybe, at most, break one of these lines into two, maximum three. So if this is one line here, if it needs a break, I could break it into two. But I actually need to see that first. And one place where I'm really going to see it is here, where we have the angle and a lot of little smaller parts coming together. We could add a feature. So these are also lines that begin to add complexity, but at the same time, description to our drawing. Now, I don't want to get all caught up in this area yet. I want to move further. The bigger as I develop smaller. Notice no curves, just straighter, smaller lines with maybe a little more sharpness in that break. Here's a big one. And it was almost broken already. Now you could do this. I may be doing it a little bit too slow. You may want to loosen up even a little bit further, where eventually your description of this will be nice, loose. And one of the biggest keys that I highly recommend is looking at your reference 10 times longer than you look at your paper. So when you draw these lines, you would be looking at your reference, not at your paper. And it's the only way you can really see the true angle and definition of the features, what you're trying to do here. As you check, and not rush. That's one big important thing here. Do not want to rush. As you continue breaking down, smaller angles. And eventually, your stylistic, your style, how you want the figure to look, to be captured, starts coming across. So the quality of the line that you're going to develop here is also going to be very, very important. So let's see if it lined up. Adding this big feature here. Very simplified. I'm not going full descriptive here. I'm just going it up. Trying to do what I'm actually asking you to do, which is not go further than this first structure step. And understanding that as you begin to go further, you need to have more and more confirmation. But it is basic, simple confirmation of what the angle is doing, the size and placement of that line, and the relationship to the other lines. There's a little bit of loss of proportion here. And we could actually enhance these here into smaller lines. And notice that they're all just variations of angles with no descriptive quality, just simple, short, straight lines. As they get looser, and there we have it. So this is just that kind of study where I would look at the full figure break it down into small lines, and you would actually take this further, slower, as you refine these lines. Then you can begin to make those smaller breaks into the rendering of muscle and those small curves. They're pretty much placed exactly where they need it to be. So you don't have to go much further. And the realization of that is going to, I believe, really set you free as a figure drawing artist. When you really see that and how easy you can get there, it all comes down to how you see it and how patient you are in developing that. Oops, we skipped one little part here. Let me finish this arm before we move to the next one. So realizing that it's all just seeing the line, seeing the angle of the line, and being pretty much clever and patient. It's I would say how to break it down, how to actually see it. I'm going to show you one more method, and that's going to be the next one. So this is another way to see this figure. It's a little more dynamic, and I want you to test both. So I don't want you to copy what I did with this one. I want you to see, oh, look, he did the head. But what I'm showing you here is there's a circle, oval, or egg for the head, torso, hip area, but then also the major joints, shoulders, elbow, in this case, wrist and hand, knees, and also the ankles. So major joints, major breaks where those lines would actually take a different angle. We're going to see it in a different way. And it is through looking at, so this is the same image, but I just want you to visualize it like this. And when you have the image, and I just placed this back so we could do it one more time. But this time, we're going to look at, okay, do I need those lines and the measurement, early one, where you find that middle? I generally do that just to be more confident right through. There it is, right? First try. Where I can begin to see and take measurements. Number one, biggest and simplest shape would be the head. So if I see this, I would tell you, and it is so true, that here, the grip is the most important thing. And we've done foundational drawing lessons where all you do is draw circles and ovals and find the rhythm. I got to switch pencil actually. Go to a little lighter for this one, where you just ghost it, meaning notice that by me moving my hand before touching the pencil to the paper, you can see how big, how small. You can actually see the circle you're about to draw before you draw it. And once you decide, yep, that's it, then you touch the paper, the pencil to the paper slowly, and it begins to appear. So this is one way. How perfect do I need it to be? What I do next is, well, if I have a major joint here, it would line up in relationship to this, which is my head, and I have the angle. One crucial element here is, where does the shoulder, and I'm going to the left one, so on the left side of the screen, it almost lines up right next to it. So just seeing it within the form, it almost turns into an egg, and it's actually shaping upwards, kind of leading me towards the elbow. You see that? But when I go to the opposite side, notice that it's way lower. There's an angle between them, and it's right inside, right at the edge of the head. So it's not outside of the head over here. It's not under the chin here. It's right at the edge, just at the edge outside of it, and it's right below the opposite. So this begins to give you the alignment and the relationship between those joints. Notice how easy it starts to become here. Now, crucial, when I look at my torso, I want to see this. This is a big one. This is a big egg here. And how it also tilts. Notice how the top part, the chest, tilts forward. And it's about that size. And now we have where the rib cage towards the hips overlapping in the opposite direction. Can you see it here? And if we begin to get these lined up almost in the right axis, the axis meaning how it leans, how it's sitting, if it's straight up or just tilting, turning, we begin to see that, well, here we would also use another joint, which would be the hip joints, and that's another way to do it. So my hips line up here and here, one higher than the other, as we see something that's called Contrapposto, which is the pose. And from here, seeing the line or the angles, where I see my knee, and I'm lining it up right inside that hip bone. I can also see it strong and straight line inside that shoulder, not right over it or outside of it, way inside. And now how this, which I see as my knee, relates to the opposite knee, which is right here, a little bit lower and a little bit smaller. So I'm seeing this knee as the upper area of this, and also because it's closer. Let's go to the smaller ones, and you could continue here following this line to what would be the ankle, and the ankle would be right here. And sometimes you do the inner and the outer. Notice that one is lower than the other. The outside ankle is lower. The inside, the inner part of the ankle bone is higher. And just to finish up the foot, you could just do an oval there, giving you some sort of a sense. For this one, we barely see the ankle, but we could do the foot just as a line, maybe, or the ball, just to kind of hint at it, which would take me to the elbow. So for this elbow, it lines up almost right, line here above, next to the hip bone, touching. And for this one, we go just across. Distance-wise, we want to make sure we find a relationship to it. So for now, we'll just place it here. And it's mostly based on the angle that it's still going up, taking us straight up, measuring by the head, lining up just above it, the wrist. And if you want, just close it out with another oval for that hand, and maybe an even smaller one for the thumb. So you begin to see the figure. Look at that. So many different ways. And maybe, now that I have this, it could be easier to work those straight lines from something like this. Now that I can see it a little bit easier, with more accuracy, it could be a different method that could absolutely work for you. And it is up to you to find what is the easiest way for you to see and develop these lines in order to gain accuracy in your drawing. As you can see here, it begins to develop really, really easy. And you can also see the volume that you can develop there. But I don't want to take this too far. We've done this one already. And just testing, just seeing how. Finding the major joints, finding the proportions, and the beginning of the structural straight line study. Oh, we forgot this wrist. which should be right here. And then that hand, which you just do with 1, 2 lines. Beginning to add a little more, not straight lines, but almost that contour, curve line, as you can see it here. It's just a little curve line and another curve line, beginning to just give us a sensation of full shape. And this really gets fun really, really fast. When you begin to see it this way, and you almost feel like you can manage any pose, any figure, while you also practice your grip, the proper grip. So this would be method number 2. So going from here, simple lines, straight lines, to taking that and developing angles, position, relationships, and just a straight line study. And then beginning to look at volumes in combination with some of those straight lines. How one of these or a combination of these, or maybe all of these, begins to simplify it for you. Okay, so for our final, and maybe not our final, we may be able to do 1 or 2 more. I want to see how you develop this one. So this would be just sharpening the pencil one more time. Now it's just a question of how would you go about it? Which is the easiest way that you would see this? How would you measure? I'm gonna pretty much follow both of the ones we just did. I'm gonna start with, you guessed it, finding top, saying the line, and I'm actually saying a line. You can place that line wherever you want, straight down the back, back of the head, right in the front, over the neck or the ear, down the shoulder, and see how that lines up. The biggest clues that you could get from setting up your line. There's a bit of graphite there. So that would be the way. But this, as my tip for the top, knowing that I go outside into the angle, there's going to be a nice angle here, leaving enough room. And obviously there's enough room going out this way for the knee. And saying, what is the bottom? And I'm going to use the foot. So it doesn't line up straight down. It's a little bit further to the left. So right about here. And that line, the edge of that line lining up with the edge of the front here, is going to give me this. Very light. You may not be able to see it, but it's there. Bottom, running down the middle, and at the top. And I can begin to see my head, joints, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go the opposite way. Build it little by little through line. Next thing, I would find my middle. So in my reference, where is that middle? So I'm going to take measurements from the toe or the bottom of the foot. You can actually place it anywhere you want, bottom of the box or the seat where he is. Let's see, right to the elbow. The top. And I actually got it in the first try. So finding middle, I'm going to actually, usually I do this intuitively, eyeballing it, checking it. It's a little bit halfway between here and here. That's it right there. Just a little bit off. But that should check out. And it does. And my midpoint is just above the elbow. So a tiny bit of elbow down here is where I measured my middle. So I have that clue there. So I know where other volumes are going to line up. Now, for the lines. So seeing where this as my middle line would set me up would be my first, I think that would actually be my first, actually I did this a little bit too much to the left here. I would make this my first line, making sure I know that it's not right through the middle, but very loosely, starting with just a simple line as the angle. And the one thing I always remind, try to stay away from just doing stick figures. You really want to see, lines through angles, and it would almost be like taking a ruler to measure your own body. The ruler's not going to bend and twist at every turn, but you could actually ride it through and it would point at the edge of, for example, the neck here. Though it's not straight, we could just hint at a tiny bit of angle with a bit of a straight line here. And then describing the head or just the side of it. So it's almost putting everything inside little boxes. And making sure those boxes are almost, oh, this angle is way sharper. And reassessing. The reason we do this is because nobody, except maybe Leonardo da Vinci, and I don't even think he would say he did, gets it right on the first line. You're supposed to do line, check, measure, relate to other lines, and then check again, and then correct again. And that is the name of the game. How do you see it? How do you build it? How do you carve it out? How do you sculpt it? And it is a good way of thinking. You're working from big piece of marble and you're basically carving it out, this big block. So in one good word, you're blocking it. I know there's other lines that you kind of want to put in there that are curved. Stay disciplined. Stay simplified. Stay economic. Stay essential. Why push it forward? The longer you take to develop this, the more chance you have to catch yourself and the more chance you have at success in your drawing. And there it is, starts coming together. Knowing you can always reposition and rearrange and make corrections. Now, here's a tip that I haven't given today. Taking a few steps back. Every now and then, stand up, take a step back, 2, 3 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet, and look at it for a few seconds. And you will be in awe. The things you will catch that will make you go, oh, look at this line, it's way off. Or, ooh, that's perfect. Let's keep going that way. You begin to see the lines coming together. You begin to see the block, and it's going to tell you, need more angle, need more tilt. And it begins to really just look simple. And at what point do I begin to add complexity? I think I'm there. I think at this point, I could look at it. I could see that there's something here. And I have this edge here on my drawing table that I could maybe just take a few extra seconds looking at. Are you using your grip? Crucial. More important than anything, catch yourself. Finding what is your range of motion with line. Can you deliver this line and this line and this line with that grip? Notice no curved lines still. I'm going with straight lines, and little by little, I'll break them. I see the angle breaks. But still, all of them, straight lines. And little by little, carving it out. So from here, where I feel I got most of the biggest, straightest lines I could put in, I would go to, I'm going to switch my pencil to the darker. And as I get a little bit darker, I'm going to break these lines just a little bit smaller with a little more precision in the angle. Now, the way you want to start is, again, from the biggest to the small. You don't want to start here and then realize, oops, this is a little bit off, have to start over. You want to start with the biggest one. So, for example, here, without going too far too quick, I'll break this one into two, where I see that muscle coming up and down. And without rushing it, you add just that little bit of complexity, that little bit of, we could see it as anatomy. And we're all different. The way we see art, that's the beauty of it. How it shows me what you see, how you decided to see it. Even though we're all looking at the same thing, you make decisions every time you put down a line. You made a decision. Here, it's the easiest way. How many more lines did you decide at this stage that we could feel necessary, unnecessary, and some of us take it way too far, way too fast? I would urge you, stay with the longest, straightest lines as possible, as long as you can. Remembering that these are just studies. Even these folds, you could all do straight lines. keeping your mind clear. What is it that I'm looking for? Proper angle. Beginning to just break the line into smaller, straight little pieces with that read of an angle. And also at the proper proportion, with the proper placement. And look how rich your drawing can become. Very descriptive as well. You can describe bone, muscle. Very interesting one here. How would you break these lines? A little too far here. We begin to get a little more intricate, a little more complex. So we break the lines just a little bit smaller. Notice how you catch that turn and the tilt of the head. And again, that question of how far you decide to go and why, it's only up to you. Nobody is telling you how many lines you need to place. It's what you're seeing, how you're seeing it, that is going to make your drawing very, very unique. To the point where you could really stylize. Very simple lines. And the economy of that line, meaning with how much you could do with less. And if you decide to use more, meaning lots and lots of line, it's for a reason. It's for a good reason, because you know you have good reason. You're showing it why you would do that. A good metaphor is cooking, where if you want to add flavors, you don't put the whole spice thing in. You select one or two, maybe three. But if you use too much, then it could be an issue. It could be spicy. Too spicy. Therefore, not enjoyable. So this was the straight line study. Let me go ahead and do one last one where I'm going to use same model, but I'll use the volume. I'll use the major joints. So same approach. And it gets so much easier once I become familiar with it, where I almost know, okay, I know where my middle point is. Oh, that's way off. You can see it already. Middle. There it is. And the more you practice this, the better you get at it. You get a better feel for it. And we go towards, remember, grip. Really, really emphasizing that. It is the thing you need to practice the most. How to use your instrument properly. So we have looseness. And you want to be thinking circles, ovals, or eggs. You do this. But you do want to see them. You want to see the shape. Notice you see it here. there's a little bit of space. So maybe you add a few lines, just one or two straight lines, as we come to shoulder. And I'm seeing the full size of it, almost like it's leaning down. And there it is, my elbow. Also more of an oval. Draw a line in between that. So from here, I want to see and I want to check where it's actually higher, way outside of my head, but how far out? Right about here. And it's definitely higher, so it would be right here. And it has sort of a extending, meaning it's kind of bending back. So it has this sort of a, it's not a lateral or frontal view of the shoulder. So it wouldn't really look like this. It actually has more of a dorsal, triangular type of shape, but we'll put it in just like that. I know what it means. And then we have the elbow leaning right in here, right at the level of the opposite shoulder right there. And the angle, and there's our elbow. Could emphasize that with the line as well. So we have a torso that's viewed from the back. You could actually see it running right through the middle. So you could actually split it into two. One, meaning you would actually see the spine and split that into two ovals, where you could almost begin to see the looks of a rib cage almost. And then the hip bone, which also, because of the view, it would be split into two, right at the glutes, meaning right here. But it all becomes ovals. So from here, got the elbow, we got the hip, got the angle. Now we look for the knee. Once we got the knee, we line up. Looking at the reference, if I draw a straight line down, find the angle for that ankle, it lines up just inside of this elbow, straight down, and just at the proper angle, finding this angle, crucial to locate this ankle. And since we only see one of them, we could actually add just a little bit of, just the hints. I like to add what's called the ball of the foot here, where you can see that. And if you could add a little smaller one too, hinting at the toe, you have your foot basically, it would be the heel, there's the ankle, and then it just comes down to, once again, setting up your lines. But once you have this, which is the other way, you pretty much kind of connect the dots. And because I did my measurements and I saw how everything was lining up, I could pretty easily find those smaller angles. And I'm almost going just in and around my shapes. Notice that. And if I get the right read in terms of size, they're almost one and done. And as you can see from here, you can develop this into a beautiful rendering, where then we would begin to look at the next stage, which would be refining the line or lighting, meaning where we would add some lights and shadows. But that comes later on. that's where I would stop right there.